I want to start out by letting everybody know, I just want to make sure we're recording. Yeah, I want to start out by letting you all know that the more professional you look, the better chances you have. Now remember what we talked about last week. The average seller only interviews one agent. So your chances of getting the listing are extremely high. The other 30% of sellers will interview 2 or 3, but typically never more than 3. So you have an incredibly good chance of getting the listing if you're prepared and if you've practiced and if you've done your work. So again, if for those of you who have been in this business 20, 30 years, and you go on a listing appointment with 2 pieces of paper and you nail it every time, that's great. I'm not advocating that you change what you do. I'm only suggesting that you consider the fact that there might be a better way. Okay? All right, so we're going to talk now. It's kind of difficult to do on Zoom, but we're going to have a conversation about what does the CMA have to look like. We already talked about the fact that when you go on a listing presentation, you have your beautiful listing book, right? Whether you've printed it and spiraled it or whether you had them pre-printed. This gorgeous listing book, we're going to talk about this dialogue next week, okay? Today is about semantics. Next week, we're going to run through the entire listing, part 1, and then we're going to do part 2 and wrap it up. So you'll be able to hear my voice, you'll be able to listen to what I'm saying and get a really good idea about how the listing appointment should flow. So this is that first 8 minutes of the listing appointment, is this gorgeous book and kind of flowing through this for the seller. The second part is the actual CMA. All right, so I happen to use Cloud CMA, which I like a lot. There's also Dash CMA, which is a fabulous program too. Whatever you want to use is fine. Many of you probably already use Cloud CMA. You can connect to it right from your ChrisNet or right from your CLA, and it appears at the bottom of your screen after you search for properties and you get your results. At the bottom, there's a Cloud CMA link. For those of you who have never gone into Cloud CMA, you need to do that. You need to go in, you need to set up your profile, you need to put your photo, you need to put your contact information and make it look professional. So make sure if you have never gone into Cloud CMA that you click into it from the MLS. So you go in from the search engine, you search for your properties, and then you go in and click Cloud CMA. All right, so we're going to talk through that process right now so that you know exactly how to make a beautiful CMA. In your Google Drive, there is a sample of a CMA for a house on Wilbur in Reseda, okay? And the front and the back of that CMA, you will find a PowerPoint, a 2-slide PowerPoint in your Google Drive, and it says CMA cover sheet. This is the cover, or whatever your cover looks like. So whatever your CMA book looks like, the cover will match it. Zach can help you with that if you don't have it. At the very back is a 3-point pricing. So these are the front and the back, okay? This slaps on the front of the CMA. This is the last page of the CMA. And then you have the CMA in the middle. All right, so I want to be very clear about that. In my class, I teach this very specifically because it's important that it looks professional. And then you can actually either bind this with the little spiral machine, which looks really nice, or you can put it in a folder, whatever is best for you. All right, so this is the only thing you're putting together when you go on the listing appointment. All right, so let's get started. In order to have a proper CMA, you have to understand how to look for value. Right? So I'm going to rattle through this part because I know a lot of you do it very well. But when you're searching for a property and the comps, the first thing you want to make sure is you're doing a radius search, right? So when you go into your search, you're going to be putting in the subject property address at the top, and you're giving it a radius, no more than 1 mile, preferably a half a mile, right? Sometimes you have to go longer, farther out, especially if you're in an area where there are not any comps at all. So again, half a mile out to a mile. That's your first criteria. Their second criteria is you're going to look for the actives, the under contract, the pendings, and the closed. And for those of you who work with me a lot, you know I only use the closed and the pendings. But again, you're more than welcome to use actives. You just need to know how to use them effectively and not let them backfire on you, right? Actives are very dangerous to show to a client unless you have a very specific dialogue that you're trying to prove a point. Everybody understand that, okay? So typically I'll do active under contract, pending, and closed. And anybody want to tell me how far back we should go on those closed listings? Anybody want to unmute themselves and tell me how far back we should go in time? Anybody?
3 months.
3 months, yeah. Don't go back farther than that. You used to be able to go back 6 months. It's just not a good thing to do, right, in a changing market. So just go back 90 days. If you don't have enough comps, then go back 120 days. If you don't have enough comps, go back to 150. Okay, but try not to go too far back in a changing market. It's gonna bite you. So very important. Try to stay within 90 days. That's what the appraisers are doing. Again, if you have to go back because you have no comps, then go ahead and stretch it out. So we've got the radius of a half a mile up to a mile. We've got 90 days back on the solds. And the third component, what's the third component we need to search for in the residential detail search? Anybody? The third thing you got to punch in.
Square footage, bedroom, bathroom count?
Don't care about bedrooms and bathrooms, but square footage we do care about, right? Absolutely. Square footage. I mean, bedrooms and bathrooms gets you a little too tight, and then the comps don't show up as much because there are many, many 2-bedroom homes that are larger than 3-bedroom homes, right? So we typically don't use that until we look at the results, and then we can edit out things that don't match. All right, but very important on the square footage. You need a square footage range, right? Right, and you can do 10% up and down. You can do 20% up and down, but I have a pretty simple formula that works. If it's an under 3,000 square foot, you know, smaller home, 1,100 square feet, 1,500 square feet, you can do 200 feet below and 200 feet above. It just depends, but don't be too wide on the square footage. So if I'm comping out a 1,600 square foot home, I might ballpark 1,300 to 1,800. And then when I look at my results, I'll bring it in tighter, right? So you want to get it in as tight as possible to the square footage, since that's the most important factor in your comparables. So if you're doing a 3,500 square foot home, I'd be looking at 3,000 to 4,000, right? 500 above, 500 below. So use your best judgment. And if you don't get enough comps, come back out and widen the square footage. If you've got too many comps in the results, tighten the square footage. Is everybody clear? All right. So if you got too many comps, tighten it up, go back, change the square footage down. If you got not enough, pull it out a little bit. So your variables are distance, half mile to a mile, square footage. So those are your two factors that are super important when you're doing your comparables, all right? So then you'll get your results. So on this particular house on Wilbur, I have all my results here. And this is just a reminder for those of you who don't use this. It's very important that you do. If you're working in ChrisNet MLS, after you've got the desired results, right? After we have the desired results, you're looking at each comp, you're studying it, you're deciding whether it is important to put in or to omit. That once you've figured out which comps you want, you then, if you're in ChrisNet, you go to print, the print icon on the bottom, the link, and then you choose Quick CMA. Okay, if you're in ChrisNet, you choose Quick CMA. If you're in Claw, you choose CMA Stats. Okay, if you're in Claw, you choose the report called CMA Stats. Super, super important that you print this first before you go into Cloud CMA or Dash CMA. So again, once you've got the results, you've looked at the results, you removed your 2 bedrooms that don't match, or if it's a 4-bedroom home, you remove a 6-bedroom. You try to tighten up the comps so that they are as relevant as possible. Once you've got the comps, right now I'm only showing on mine active under contract, pending, and closed. That's all I care about. I don't like actives in my listing appointments. I'll bring them, but I don't like to put them in here. So once you're tightened up your comps and you like the comps that are in the results, then again, if you're in ChrisNet, you go to print, you choose quick CMA. If you're in CLA, you go to reports, you go to CMA stats. All right. This is the one wonderful piece of paper that does the math for you. Okay. It does the math for you. At the bottom of that, and if while you're listening to me, you're welcome to jump into your CMA, you're welcome to jump into your MLS and do this. This tells you the maximum, the minimum, and the median. And it gives you the median price on the home, and it gives you the median square footage, and it gives you the median price per square foot. Super important. Median price per square foot, and median square footage. It also gives you the average days on market for each of the homes. So once you have this data, this is the single most important piece of paper you're bringing with you, is this layout. It's easy to understand. It really lays out for the seller exactly the math, so they don't have to try to do it in their head, and it's a critical piece. So we do this first. We save this to our desktop. Then we go back to our results, and now we choose Cloud CMA. Right? And if you're using a different CMA program, that's fine. I'm just going to use Cloud because it's our standard. All right. Once you click on Cloud CMA, now there are 3 green buttons in Cloud CMA. The first one, you go and put the person's name, Mr. and Mrs. John and Mary Smith. You put the property address. It pulls it. It pulls title. So this is the cover page it's going to create. And then if you want to put a front picture of the house, that's very nice to do. You can insert the front picture of the house, okay? For those of you who have not created a template in Cloud CMA, you need to do that. Otherwise, Cloud CMA is going to print like 70 pages of junk because the stuff it's printing is already in your beautiful book. It talks about what is a CMA, what is pricing. It has all this very generic stuff. You don't need it. You just hit the little minus sign and get rid of all that. You only need the cover page. They call it the title page, the contact page, the map, the listings, okay? And you're going to ask for it to give you the first 12 pictures. And then you want the sold property analysis. That's it. I'm going to say it again. In Cloud CMA, you only want the cover or title page. You want the map, the contact me page. You want the map. You want the listings themselves, which is called the first 12 pictures. And then you want the sold property analysis. That is all you want. That is all you want, okay? And if you need help with that, just reach out to me, reach out to Zach. I'll be happy to help you. Just text me or call me when you're in front of your computer. I'll be happy to help you with it, okay? But please don't have all those pages because they're duplicate to what you already have here, okay? It just makes the CMA crazy and unwieldy. So just the cover, the contact me, the map, the listings, 12 pictures. It has a cover and then 12, and then the sold property analysis. So when I walk through this, you'll see that that's all we're showing. All right, great. So now, once you have your template design, for those of you that like the Michael Lewis Marketing Suite, if you don't have access to it, all you have to do is call Cloud CMA Tech Support and tell them you want the Michael Lewis Marketing Suite enabled. So you can pick it, and it looks really nice, okay? So it gives you a nice style. Otherwise, you're going to be picking the gold and the black and the green and the blue, all the different color choices. But you need to create your template and save it so that every time you go to bring your stuff in, it looks the same. All right? So the first thing that happens when you click on the Cloud CMA link is there's a green bar that says Fetch Listings. Fetch Listings. So it's going to look at all the listings that you checked back in your MLS, and it's only going to bring those over. Okay, guys? So it's super important that you sort them by lowest price to high before you click Cloud CMA. Lowest price to high. You click Cloud CMA, you click Fetch Listings. It's a green bar. The next green bar says Customize Report. You click Customize. And that's when you go and you pick your template. Okay? And then last but not least, there is a green bar that says Publish. Publish. You click Publish, and now it's going to generate this gorgeous PDF. Okay? So it's really important that you do it this way so that it looks fabulous when you're going on that appointment. All right. Any questions so far before I continue? Unmute yourself if you have a question. Okay? Wonderful. Let's continue. All right. Now, let's talk about what this thing looks like now when you print it. Okay? So when you start with the CMA, it's exactly what I just said. Here's that cover page, followed by Contact Me, followed by the map of the subject property and all the listings, and followed by the listings, okay, the property details. So the way it looks is it gives you a one page of all the property information, how long it was on market, what it sold for, right? And it has 2 pictures. The second page of that same listing has 12 more pictures. You see that? So this is one comp right here. See how pretty that is? You're able to speak to the condition of the property because you've got these lovely pictures to do that, okay? So then you go to the second comp. Sorry about my flipping here. This comp is on Staticoi. Again, we got the cover of it, and then we got 12 more pictures. You see that? That's one comp. And then and so on and so on. The next comp, all the information we need to talk about that comp, 12 more pictures of the comp, and moving on, etc., etc. So when you get to the end of all the comps, you are left with a page called Sold Property Analysis, okay? This page doesn't do the math. It's just pretty, and it summarizes all of the solds, okay? This page doesn't do the math. Quick CMA or CMA Stats does the math. But this is nice to have because it kind of summarizes them all before you close in for pricing, all right? So what I'm going to do today right now is I'm actually going to dialogue this, all right? So we can talk about how would we arrive at presenting the price to the seller. And again, for those of you who have been in this business for a really long time and you like to show up with a couple of comps, that's great. I'm just offering you an alternative that might be more professional and more, more depth in the way you're presenting to a client. So remember, when you're trying to talk to a client about comps, your job is you're going to lead them to an answer that you've already presented. It's very important. It's the language of sales, right? I'm going to lead them through a story to get to a number that I want them to pick. Now, I know a lot of you have a style, and I think that it's great. I love it, that you ask the client on the pre-listing call what they think their house is worth. Many, many top agents do that. I think that's great. It just doesn't work for me, but it certainly is a lot of people will ask the client on the phone before the actual listing appointment, do you have a number in mind, right, that you think the house is worth? And for the people that do that, I commend you. I think that's absolutely wonderful. It just doesn't work personally for me. My personality is such that I want to lead the client to self-realize a price. So because I don't want to go up against a block before I need to. So the goal is to try to lead them through the data to arrive at a price. And that's where you come in with this last page, okay? Again, it's the PowerPoint that's in your Google Drive. It's called CMA Cover, all right? This is a Mike Ferry 3-point pricing. strategy, okay? I've used it for almost 20 years. It works really, really well. There are a lot of strategies you can use for pricing. A lot of you do what is called range pricing, where you just give them a range. That's cool too. I just find that 3-point pricing allows you to just narrow in. They pick a number, and then you know exactly what you need to do with objection handling. It makes it so simple. I don't like surprises. I'm a Taurus. My sign is a Taurus. I don't like surprises. I like to know kind of what's going on. So I don't like to be surprised at the end of my CMA and have the client say something wacky. So I like to present them this Mike Ferry 3-point pricing. Steve Scholl also uses this. He's a big coach here in Los Angeles. Many of you know him. So I like the 3-point pricing. I think it works. And it basically, what we're trying to do at the end of our CMA is to put the seller in a box, right? So that they choose one of our numbers, rather than coming up with some random number out of the blue. Any questions about that strategy? Anybody want to unmute themselves? Anybody have a question? Okay, I'm going to keep going. All right. So right before I do that, I get this page. All right, so from the top, I've just talked to the seller about how fabulous I am, right? We're going to do that next week. I'm going to do the whole listing presentation for you, start to finish, okay? We've just told them how wonderful we are and all the great things we're going to do to get top dollar for their home. All right, then we transition to the CMA. All right, so I'm gonna pick up with the very end of the listing presentation itself, and I'm gonna go right into pricing, okay? So this house is on Wilbur Street in Reseda. And please don't look at this as the numbering. This is just a sample, all right, guys? This isn't the price for the house. All right, first thing I wanna do is, anybody who's familiar with this particular part of Reseda would know that there's a range here for this home, okay? And we're trying to lead them to water to come up with this range, okay? So what I would do is, as soon as I'm finished with the pricing strategy conversation with the seller, I explain to them about the importance of pricing right and pricing attractively. You'll hear me say that next week. And then when I make sure they don't have any questions about pricing, I then say to the seller, great, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, now let's take a look at the numbers for your home. Okay, that's the transition. Again, you need to internalize the script to sound like you, not me. But as soon as you're done with the first part of your presentation, where you talk about yourself and your marketing and everything you're going to do, and then you go into pricing strategy, which is the very end of that component, that's the first 8 to 10 minutes that you're sitting with them after your tour. Now you transition. You say, great, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, now let's talk about the numbers for your home. And you pull out your beautiful CMA, okay? And you say, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I have the comparable market analysis for your home here. And I want to start out by letting you know how I arrive at value. You see, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I use the same method that a bank appraiser will use to evaluate your home, because most of the buyers that are going to make an offer on your home have to get a loan, and they're going to have an appraiser come out. So I use the same methodology that an appraiser uses to appraise your home. So, and then I flip over and I say, here's the map of all of the homes that are similar to your home in the area. And this is where they're located relevant to where your house is. So let's get started taking a look at those comparables. And then I begin with the first one. And now I'm going to tell a story. All right, I'm going to tell a story. All right, this first house, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, on Cavello is very similar in size to yours. It sold back in June, and it sold in less than a week for $585,000. This home was not really remodeled. It's in its kind of 1980s condition. So it is a similar condition to what your home is in. So you notice I didn't say a lot of numbers. You didn't hear me say a lot of numbers there. Okay, I'm going to do the next one. Now this home on Satakoy, this is slightly smaller than yours. It sold in, again, less than 2 weeks last month, and it sold for $598,000. This home has not had any upgrades at all. So it's in, not an upgraded condition, but it sold for $598,000 in less than 2 weeks. This next home on Bovey in Reseda, this home is just about the same size as yours. It sold in about 3 weeks for $628,000, and it's had a gentle remodel. They've polished up the floors, but it really hasn't been remodeled. It's just a gentle remodel. Then I go to the next one. I keep telling my story. This home on Claire, it's about the same size as yours. It sold in only 2 days for $515,000. Then I go to the next house and I talk about the next one, and et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Then I go to this house on Rhea Street, which is larger, completely remodeled, sold for $687,000. That one shouldn't even be in there. I go to the next house, Sylvia Avenue. This house is a little larger than yours, and it sold in less than 5 days for $615,000. This house is very similar to yours in its condition. And I'm pointing to the pictures as I'm flipping, okay? I'm pointing to the pictures, and I'm facing the client like this, right? And I'm flipping this way, and they're sitting across from me or at an angle from me. And in COVID time, you're a little bit farther away, so you might want to give 2 copies, right? One for them to hold and flip while you're doing yours. So because you don't want to be too close, you want to have that respect and that social distancing, you may want to bring 2 sets of this so they can flip along with you, all right, while you're talking. So then again, you'll notice I'm not going 3 bedroom, 2 bath, 1,429 square feet. I'm not being clinical, all right? Because if I get clinical, their eyes are going to glaze over. If you've got a high IS and you're reading these comps and you're saying this is 1,429 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, they're going to get glazed over. They're going to forget what you're talking about. So you really have got to appeal to the majority of American population, which is IS disc profile, right? So they can't, not everybody's a numbers person. So you need to talk more like a narrative, all right? This next house on Bovey is about 100 square feet bigger than yours. It sold back in April. It took about a month to sell this house. It really needed a lot of work, but it did finally sell, and then you talk. And then you go to the next one, this house on Satakoy. It's got 1 more bedroom than yours, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, a little bit smaller, very nice curb appeal, but it really hasn't been remodeled. Sold in 3 weeks for $605,000, and et cetera, et cetera. I'm going through my comps. I have a lot of comps here. After I finish telling my story, 1 house at a time, and I talk about what street it's on, what its reference is to your home, larger, smaller, the same, larger, smaller, the same, how long it took to sell it and what it sold for, and then I follow with the condition by looking at the pictures. And I very respectfully compare the condition to theirs, okay? So if the comp, like this one, complete remodel, I would say this was completely remodeled top to bottom. I would say this is a similar condition to yours. I would say this hasn't been remodeled at all. You have to use generic terminology as you're describing the comps, all right? Now, when you get to the end, you've got this little sold analysis. Now it's time to flip over to the quick CMA and the CMA stats, all right? So you pull that out, which is now should be the next page, should be this.
Can I interrupt and ask a quick question?
Yes, Lauren.
When you go over the sold analysis paper, what do you say with that?
I just say, here's the summary of all the, so here's the summary of all the properties that have sold, and now let's take a look at the analysis. I only use this to remind me that I'm at the end of the comps, okay? It really is. It's basically a bookmark. It reminds us that we're at the end of the comps now, and it's time to move to this page, okay? So it goes like this.
Thank you.
All right, got it. All right, so now, as I'm going through this, I'm now going to transition. So before I continue on, I want to stop and just rephrase my story. I said, this house on Covello, this house on Satakoy, this house on whatever the name of the street is. Notice that I'm not going to clinically read the addresses. Again, they're going to glaze over, guys, if you get too technical with them. Now, if we only got 3 comps, and that's all you have, of course you can get more detailed in your conversation, but I think I have 11 or 12 comps here. I've got about 11 comps. They're going to get like, I'm going to lose them if I read the square footage, the bedrooms, the bathrooms, the days on market. You've got to translate days on market to less than a week, less than a day, less than 2 weeks, right? That's how their brain works. Remember, people's brains are visual, right? So you've got to just be really careful not to get clinical, because you get clinical, you're going to lose them. And once you lose them, you've lost your momentum, all right? So I said, similar to yours, slightly larger, slightly smaller. I shouldn't be able to say much larger because we've kept our square footages tight. So this house is about the same as yours, square footage, slightly larger, slightly smaller, 1 more bedroom on this street. This house sold in only 1 day for X amount of dollars. This house took a month to sell. They started at this price because the original list price is in here. So if you want to tell the story of an overpriced listing, it talks about the original list price, okay? Super important. And then you say how long it took to sell, which is probably one of the most important pieces of information, and what it sold for. Then you follow up with that second page of all the pictures and you compare it to theirs, all right? Now we get to here. We say, now let's take a look at the analysis. And what's so great about this is you don't have to go through the whole thing again. We just did that. All you have to do is say, if you take a look at the analysis, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you can see that the average of the pricing was $610,000. All right, and the average square footage was 1458, very similar to yours, and the average days on market was 9. So that's our median price range. And so let's take a look at some options for you to consider, okay? Now I'm about to throw the power back to the seller. I held the power so far, right? I'm doing the comps, I'm talking about the comps. I want to tell them the story so that I lead them to the water, right? So now I go and I say, based on this information, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I have 3 options for you to consider. Okay, that's a dialogue that works really, really well. Based on the information I've shared with you, I have 3 options for you to consider. Then you flip to this last page. And again, disregard the numbers that are on here. I was using it as a sample. The first one I listed as event pricing. Let me give you some clinical breakdown here, okay? Event pricing is called low. Fair market value is called medium. And out of market is called high. I don't care if you call them low, medium, and high, but low, medium, and high tends to have connotations to them. So if you use the event pricing, fair market, and out of market pricing, this is a very common language that people use to present. So Mr. and Mrs. Seller, based on the information, I have 3 options for you to consider. The first one is called event pricing. And let's say I had $599 there. So for this particular home, I'm going to have $599. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, at this price, you are most assuredly going to have multiple offers. There are no guarantees in life, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, but if we price it at event pricing, you're going to have multiple offers and you're going to have a lot of backups. So it'll most likely drive the price up and you will have backup offers. That's the first option for you to consider. The second option, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, is the fair market value. Now this number, let's say I have 610 here, okay? 610 in that middle number, because remember it matches this. It should be close to this middle number. 610,000. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, this is a very good number that where the appraisal should come in at. I mean, the appraisal on your home should come in at this number. And then last but not least, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, this is the out of market. And let's say I put 620 there. We're just being hypothetical here. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, there's no data to suggest that your home will sell for this price. Now, based on these options, what are you thinking that your home is worth? Or based on these options, where do you think your home's value should be? Or based on these options, where do you think your list price should be? You need to now throw the power back to them. Okay, this is NLP, right? Neuro-linguistic programming. I have just programmed them to pick a number, right? I said, this gives you multiple offers, it'll go higher. Event pricing, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. Now, if you price at this price, you're gonna have multiple offers. You're probably gonna drive the price higher, and you're gonna have a lot of backups. And most likely we'll be able to get very favorable terms. The middle number, this is the kind of where the top of the appraisal should come in at. And then this number right here, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, the out of market, there's no data here to suggest that your home will sell for this. Based on these options I've presented to you, what do you think is the best option for you? Okay, you ask the question the way you speak, all right? It's your language. You're internalizing the script for you. But options to consider is a very respectful way to tell a client that they have a choice, right? I have 3 options for you to consider. That's a very, very specific sentence that shows respect for the seller and allows them to know that they have a choice, all right? And then when you give them the 3, it's no different than saying, do you want to meet at 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, or 6 o'clock, right? When you're setting an appointment, you never leave it wide open. You try to lock them in. So you ask them the question and then you shut up. Okay, based on these options, which one do you think is the best one for you? Or based on these options, which one lines up the most to what you thought the home was worth? However you want to say the question, you want to say, based on these options, question. And stand back, let them talk. Let them talk. All right? Now we're going to talk about logical sellers and emotional sellers. All right? This is really important. If you're going to become a top listing agent and get it every time, you need to understand emotion. If the sellers are vibrating at logic, okay, what number are they going to pick? Anybody want to unmute themselves? If they're vibrating at logic.
I know. Oh, wait.
Go ahead, Christine.
They would pick below fair market value.
Well, they would, either that or the middle number, right? The real a strategic seller will pick that event pricing. It is a small percentage that will pick that. The larger group will pick that middle number, right? The median, but the strategic sellers will always pick that low number. But it is rare, very rare these days to find a strategic seller. You know, my husband and I, in all the homes we've sold over 30 years, we're strategic sellers, right? We always price here. We always have 10 offers. We always sell our homes in 2 days, significantly over market. That's our strategy. That's what we've been doing for 30 years. But most people will pick middle or the low one if they are logical. So they will say something like this. If they're logical, they'll say, you know, this is kind of what we were thinking, you know. Well, and then you say, well, wonderful, that's terrific. Based on that, and then you flip out your net sheet, okay? So I'm making the person that's logical first. We're going to do this quick objection handle, okay? So most of the logical people are going to pick that middle, or the strategic people will pick that low number, okay? So when they pick that middle number, you say, that's terrific. I'm really glad that you chose the, you know, fair market value. That's going to be working very well for you. I have brought with me a net sheet. Based on this, I have a net sheet here of what you would net on the close of escrow based on that number. We're not going to go over the net sheet right now. We're going to do that in the next 2 sessions. But you now whip out your net sheet. You're going to make them even happier, okay? And you're going to show them what they're going to net on the close. But we don't really flip the net sheet out until we agree, right? We have to agree on price. I can't flip out a net sheet if we're still in, you know, objection handling. So a logical seller is going to pick this number or something really close to that where you're there and you're happy. Great, that was a great choice. I'm glad you chose I'm glad you went with that. That's going to work really well for you. Based on that, let me show you a net sheet of what you would net on the close of escrow. They love that. Because what is the one thing, the only thing they care about when you go on that listing appointment? Anybody want to answer that?
How much will they walk away with?
That's it. They don't care about anything else. How much are they going to get? And no, they can't do the math. I know you guys think they can, but they can't do the math, okay? And again, I know many of you don't use net sheets because you're afraid, and that's fine. That's something you'll have to mature into, but the net sheet nails it every time because, as I've talked about in many of my previous classes, 80 or 90% of the logical sellers, they are pleasantly surprised by the net number. It's more than what they thought they were going to get. And so when you use the net sheet, it's really nice because they know exactly what they're going to expect, give or take, very, very approximate, but very close. And they're happy. Everybody's going into it with the same wonderful expectation. Being a broker for all these years, I cannot tell you how many people will come to me and their seller is freaking out. They got their net sheet for the first time from escrow 2 weeks before the close, right? They got their estimated proceeds and they're freaking out. It's not what they thought. Now they're going to pick on every single line item and they're going to start getting into commission problems with you 2 weeks before close. Is that the right time for them to know how much they're going to make? No. That's really irresponsible, but I know many agents don't like the net sheet, so they'd rather just deal with it later in escrow. But I'm telling you, I'm not a surprise person. I don't like surprises. I like things to go smooth. So for me, I want to deal with it now. I know I'm going to get the listing, right? Because 70% of sellers only interview one agent. We've already agreed on price. Now let me tell them what they're going to get. So it's a really easy, logical flow of the conversation, okay? Now let's rewind and let's go to the unreasonable seller, okay?
Quick question before
Yes, Harry.
So do you ever want to talk them into the other strategy?
I don't, no. I mean, people that pick that one, they're really smart. They know what they're doing. So I don't talk them into this one. I don't. I really don't. I used to do that 18, 15 years ago when I was younger and more aggressive, but I don't think it's a good idea because I want them to own the power of the choice, right? We want them to own the choice. And I don't want them to feel like I pushed them. But what am I doing? I completely strategize this conversation so they'll pick my number, right? Let's be very, very clear about what goes on here, guys. That top number better be a multiple offer number, right? The middle number better be a slam dunk. You know you're going to get activity on the middle number and probably full price. And this number better be not too high. This number needs to be above where you think the appraisal would come in, okay? So on this house on Wilbur, there's a chance that this house could sell for $650, right? But I won't put $650. I won't even put anything in the middle number unless I know for sure that I'm going to get action, okay, on that number. So you really have to massage the comps first, and then you'll lay out those three figures, right? It's super important. Now, most of the work on a CMA goes into massaging the comps, right? We've talked about this in many of my classes, having done, I don't know, maybe 10,000 listing appointments. I don't remember, but how many thousands of listing appointments I've been involved with other agents and gone on myself. I will tell you that to this day, I have to spend an hour and a half to 2 hours on my CMA, right? You've got to make sure the numbers are there. You need time to stare at the numbers. You need time to hone in and get exactly the right comps. I picked a really easy one because there's so many comps in this neighborhood in Reseda. Reseda is a super easy city to comp out, but there are other areas that are harder. Yes, Parisa? Did I hear a question?
Yeah. Oh, I just was going to ask one thing. What if they're on the fence? So what if they say, Parisa, I know my house is worth more than event pricing, right? Yeah. I believe, what if the response is, I believe it's worth more than that. So I'm a little bit concerned, Parisa. I'm a little bit on the fence. I feel we should go with fair market value, but I also feel looking at event pricing, my house is worth more than that. What do you think? What if they leave me then with a question? I've gotten that before.
Great question. I used to get that all the time. What do you think, Veronica? Do you think, what I like to say is, look, this event pricing, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I know we're going to get multiples. I know we're going to go over list. How much over? I cannot tell you that. Will we get to the middle number? Most of the time, that number gets you to the middle number or higher. There are no guarantees, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, but most of the time, The event pricing gets you to the middle number or higher, right? That's in the under 1.2 market, all right? In the over 1.5, it's a little harder. So yeah, I try to leave that decision to them, okay? Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you most assuredly are gonna have multiple offers here. You're most assuredly gonna get way over list. I can't tell you if you're gonna get that number or higher. It's possible, yes, that you're for sure gonna get this or higher, but there's no guarantee. It's your decision.
Do we
Okay.
want to get an answer right away?
Of course, Harry, I'm taking the listing today. I'm not leaving here until I have a listing,
Got it.
right? You think I'm walking out of the house without a listing agreement signed?
Well, no, not you.
They have to decide right here, right now. Top listing agents don't walk out without the listing, unless I'm just having a CMA conversation for somebody who's going to sell in a few years. Different conversation. I'm talking about an actual listing appointment. I'm not leaving without this. You can't. That's what we're here for, right? So if they pick the middle, awesome. If they pick the top, awesome. What happens when they pick the out of market? What kind of conversation would they say? Here's what comes out of their mouth. Well, Veronica, I think our house is worth at least this, even more. I think we're worth 680. All right, and that's your emotional seller, that third number or higher. Okay, everybody remember what the 3 reasons that we have an emotional seller. What are the 3 reasons somebody overprices and doesn't listen? Anybody?
Got too much money in it.
Yes, I put too much into it. Pride, right?
I paid too much.
I paid too much. Regret. What's the third one?
I'm afraid I'm not going to clear enough.
Right. I need this much money. Fear. All right. Remember, it's always one of those 3 emotions. If you understand emotional scales and how to deal with people, if I pick an overpriced house, and the data has been shown to me, so either the person doesn't get it or they're emotional. The answer is they're emotional. They're not stupid. They're emotional. Okay. And there's no such thing as strategizing starting really high. Okay. No such thing. That's not a strategy, right? It's a strategy for losing, right? So the key here is that the minute they pick that high number, you know what you're dealing with. You know what you're dealing with. And they're going to tell you all the reasons why it's worth that much. But they will not divulge to you the fear reason unless you go deeper. So they'll say something like, we just finished that backyard and the pool. We put 50,000 in that kitchen. That's what you're going to hear, right? That's the emotion of pride. And you know what? We paid $649,000 for this house, Veronica. And we put another 20 into it. Now they're coming from pride and regret, right? So regret is I paid too much. Pride is I put too much into it. And fear is I'm desperate for this much money. I have to have this much to put in my IRA. I have to have this much for the down payment on my next house, right? But you know what? Those things don't matter because you can't time markets and the house is worth what it's worth. And a logical person will know that. So if they come from fear or pride or regret, you have to appease them. I totally understand. I so appreciate what the beautiful work you did, Mr. Seller, on that kitchen, but you don't get a dollar for dollar back on remodel. When you remodel a home, you're remodeling it for yourself to enjoy it, right? And the style of which you remodel might not appeal to buyers. It may or may not appeal to certain buyers. You did a beautiful job on that bathroom, Mr. Seller, but you don't get a dollar for dollar back. You get, how much you guys get back on a remodel? Unless it's a flip and you bought a completely untouched home, how much do you get back?
20-25%.
Yeah, 25 cents on the dollar. You get 25 cents for every dollar you put in, right? So you've got to be very careful, very gentle, very respectful. Mr. Seller, you did a great job. That pool is gorgeous, absolutely. And I'm sure you built it to enjoy it, but you don't get a dollar for dollar back, all right? And you did beautiful work. It's just that not every buyer may find it to their taste or their liking. And at the end of the day, the remodel is something you did for your enjoyment, okay? All right, so, and then you go back, you got to keep coming back until you come to an agreement, and then they're going to hit you back again, right? Remember we say we do 3 punches before we give up? three handlings. So you come back at a punch, they come back and say, well, I'm sorry, but I think it's worth 650, 680. I so appreciate that, you know, and back to appreciating them again and saying, well, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you know, the house will never appraise at 680,000. We don't even have anything. The highest appraisal value we have on the entire neighborhood was X amount. And that was the house over on such and such street. It's not even in the comps. It's a much larger home and it was blah, blah, blah. So I've now come back with a second handling. And now they're like, I don't care. We're not going to list it if I don't get 680,000 for this house. Okay, so basically, if you don't sell it for 680, you're not going to sell the home. Is that correct? So I'm restating what they say, right? All right, and now I'm going to give up. Now I'm going to give up. I'm going to take an overpriced listing. I'm going to say, well, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I certainly will list the house wherever you wish, but it's my job to tell you the truth. You know, I have a legal liability to tell you the truth. And I totally respect where you want to list it. I'll be more than happy to list it at 680,000 and put all the power of our marketing behind it. We're going to put enormous amount of expense and marketing into this. And if we don't have an offer within 2 weeks, we would like to come back and revisit this, right? And what do they say to that most of the time when you say that? Very illogical, very emotional seller, what are they going to say? If I say, well, we need to come back and revisit this if we don't have an offer within a couple of weeks.
They're going to say if we don't have an offer in a couple weeks, that they're done.
Yeah, they'll either say, well, then too bad, I won't sell it. Or they'll say, we'll deal with that when we get there, right? That's fine, that's great. Well, I brought the paperwork over with me and then you flip over. Now, one of the things that I like to do with the overpriced seller is I still am gonna show them the net sheet for the correct price. I bring 3 net sheets, one for each of these, right? I have my net sheet for the overpriced one, right? But I'm not going to show them that. I just have it with me. I take out the net sheet for the middle number. And I say, well, I just wanted to kind of go over with you kind of what you would net and then see, and that's when you're going to see if there's if they're fear-based, okay? And, you know, because we know that we'll be able to net 430,000 from your home based on the information you've given me. Yes, go ahead, Parisa.
Oh, sorry for the background noise. You don't pull it out.
Okay.
No problem. I was just going to ask, you don't pull it out for event pricing? No net sheet?
Yeah, I have it for event, but if I'm already dealing with an illogical, emotional person, we're definitely not going to be at event pricing, right?
Right. What I mean is that if they actually select event pricing, bring out the net.
Of course. Then I would give them the net for event pricing, of course. We'll do that in our dialogue in the next 2 weeks. And I'll talk about, this is a worst case scenario of what you net, right? Worst case, you're going to net 149,000. And if we get more, you'll net more than that. So I would do a worst case, you're going to net this, which is good news. Okay. I'm dealing right now with the emotional seller who's not logical. So we go back a couple of times and then we concede. Now, some of you don't have to take the listing. That's fine. Why would I take an overpriced listing?
Leads.
Buyer leads.
Yeah, buyer leads. I don't care. They want to overprice it. That's great. I'm going to get some buyer leads. I'm going to get exposure on the internet. I'll probably pick up some sellers off of it, right? You know, so if I'm going to put my time and effort into it, I'm going to pick something up out of this, right? So please be aware when they pick the high or higher, they're coming from pride, regret, or fear. Sometimes all of the above. They bought it for too much, they put too much into it, and now they're dying financially, okay? So it could be all three, all right? You've got to know what you're dealing with, because if you don't know what you're dealing with, then you're not able to address it, okay? You have to come from logic. You cannot come from emotion. You have to come from logic and just a very, very pragmatic professional approach, right? And then you have to wear them down. Most of you are really good at wearing down your sellers, okay? And finally wear them down to where they're gonna come up with a decision. There are very few sellers that go through 3 listing agents. That's extremely rare, extremely rare. Most of the time you will wear them down if they wanna sell that house. Sometimes you won't, they'll expire out, right? And then somebody else is gonna wear them down, the second or the third agent. But that's pretty rare. Even though there are a lot of expireds on the market, eventually that client is gonna wear down. Hopefully you'll be the one to wear them down. But at the end of the day, hopefully you got some leads from it. and we're able to make something happen. Now, there is a rule of thumb. If you have no showings in 2 weeks, you're absolutely overpriced, right? If you have showings and no offers, you're overpriced, right? So no showings or showings and no offers. It's super important that you give them your activity, right, when you go on the market. So once they pick that high number and you've been going back and forth on your objection handling, you say, well, that's fine, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. Let's go ahead and list it at 680. I've brought the paperwork with me, and transition to paperwork, okay? Any questions about this CMA conversation? I'm going to recap it. Christine?
Well, I guess it's not about the conversation so much as I had questions about how to value a property with an ADU. If you had any tip, a garage
Yeah,
conversion.
Absolutely. Depends
And then
on
also,
where it is.
Also, how much does lot size matter?
Okay, thank you so much. Lot size matters a lot. Lot size can increase the price by 20% in some cases, right? I mean, if it's significantly different, not 1,000 feet different. I'm talking about a 7,500 versus a 13,000, significantly different, right? But if you've got a 6,000 to 8,000 lot, you've got some value, but not the difference that you would be expecting. Typically, the dirt in and of itself is worth 30 to 35% of the total value. The dirt, the actual dirt. So lot size matters when there is enough variance for it to be double the size, 40% larger, but 10% larger lot size, you don't get a whole lot on there. It depends on the footprint of the house relative to the lot. So you could have an 8,000 lot with no backyard and somebody who has a 6,500 lot well purposed, and the 6,500 lot will value better than the 8,000. So it's the use as well.
What about two very comparable, flat, one's 10,000, one's 16?
Huge difference in price. Again, if I said it's 40% or more, right? So you're talking about a 16,000 lot is 60% bigger than the 10. That's huge. But if it's 10% bigger, 20% bigger, not going to matter. If you need help with a comp, just call me and I'll help you arrive at value. Let me answer your ADU question, okay? So the ADUs in and of themselves have always created a percentage value when they used to be duplexes. Now that we have the phenomenon of ADUs, appraisers are struggling with how to arrive at value for that ADU, right? Sometimes an ADU can be worth 60,000 more. Depends on how big it is. Depends if it's attached to the garage, above the garage, or inside the garage. Inside the garage is the lowest value, right? Attached, adjacent is the second lowest, and above is the highest because you're making better use of land space, right? It depends on the size. It depends on where it is adjacent to. So again, inside the garage, less value. Attached to the garage, little more, and above, a lot more, okay? Because you're making better use of the overall land space. So it just depends how much of the footprint you're eating into, but we all know that when you take a garage and simply convert it, it's not gonna have the value of an ADU on a detached garage. Not gonna have the same value, okay? So even, so you have to just kind of look at each one on a case-by-case basis. This is doing comps is not art and it's not science, is it? It's both. It's both. You start with the science, you run your comps, then you have to add the art. And the art is the interpretation of what a perceived buyer will value that at. And we're still in a world where ADUs have what is called a perceived value. That means we don't know the formula yet because the value is coming from the buyer. We know the square footage price. If the house is selling for $424 a foot and the ADU is 600 feet, yeah, you can do the math. $424 times 600 more feet, the ADU should be worth X, right? Doesn't really work that way. It's not that cut and dry. I wish it was, Christine, but it's not.
So just hypothetically, if you had a 5-bedroom home with 2,700 square feet, would you then compare it with a 4-bedroom home with an ADU, both totaling 2,700 square feet?
No, the ADU does present more value.
Because it has kitchen, has income, the whole thing.
Yeah, the ADU presents more value than just having a bigger size home. Because of the income because of the income, the way they'll try to appraise it for income.
And perceived value too.
Yes. Any other questions? I'm so sorry we ran over 5 minutes.
Can I
Any other
piggyback?
questions?
Yeah, sorry, I was going to piggyback on that, Christine. That was an awesome topic. What if it's not legally permitted? They've built it, they just don't have permits. Then we're
Yeah,
not
that's a problem.
evaluation.
That's just an overall problem. It's going to get perceived value, and that's all it's going to get. The appraiser even sometimes will value it non-permitted. It just depends. A lot of appraisers will give it this kind of hypothetical value, but not a legal value. Okay? It still gets perceived value. And that's what a buyer is willing to pay. That's perceived value.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Sonia. Yeah.
Hi. Okay, so I don't have a question, but I just want to share something. So I had a very strange seller, and he just wouldn't budge on the price, and it was overpriced. I knew it was overpriced, and my better judgment told me not to take that listing. But it was a friend of my husband, so he said, just please take it. I said, okay. And it's really, it's really hard to deal with somebody who's not a logical person and irrational. They really drive you crazy. They waste a lot of your time, and think twice about taking that listing if you run into that kind of person. It takes up a lot of your time.
Good point, Sonia.
Yeah, very stressful. And with the time that I spent on that, I probably would have been better off taking 3 or 4 other buyers out and doing something else with my life. They just waste a lot of your time. I mean, if they're a nice person and you think you can get them to lower the price within 2 or 3 weeks, if you don't get any offers, that's one thing. If you're dealing with the same person, and if you say, okay, Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. If we don't get any activity in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, can we revisit this, maybe lower the price, make it more appealing to the general home shopper market? If they say no, that they have to have that price, I would think twice about dealing with that person, because unless you really think you can wear them down, if you can wear them down, then take it. The thing about the buyer leads, in the past, I definitely did that. I would just take it, hold open houses, and get tons of leads out of it. The problem with this is we're not even allowed to have open houses, so you could just be dealing with an insane person.
Great point. Good point, Sonia. I so appreciate your wonderful feedback. And I know that you have a lot more experience. Sonia's a mega agent. She's been in the business 30 years. She doesn't need to take an overpriced listing, right? She does a lot of business. For those of you who are newer in the business, you might want to consider if you have the psychological wherewithal to wear them down. Very good point. I appreciate your comment.
Okay, right. Yeah. I mean, as a new agent, definitely take it, because it's good experience. Either way, you'll get some experience out of it. But. Yeah,
absolutely. So yeah, it's really your stamina on being able to wear someone down. And you guys, when you come across that, just come to myself, come to Demetra, come to Dan. We'll be happy to help you with that and guide you. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for going over today with me. I look forward to seeing you next week. We're going to dialogue the listing appointment. Thank you.
Veronica, can I ask you something?
Yes.
Veronica, could I ask you something? It's actually like a personal question. Could I ask something after the class, please?
Oh, sure. Call me right after we're done. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Veronica.
Thank you so much, Veronica.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend. Stay well.
Thank you.